Is Flins a bad pull for beginners? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, Genshin 6.0 is here, and with that, I'm sure there's plenty of new players, many of which might be having their eye on Flins specifically. Understandable, he is very, very handsome. But the real question is he good for beginners, or is it kind of bricked to go for him at this point? I would say if you have a more established account, he is generally a pretty good pull no matter what, because even if you don't have an Effa, he's still going to be able to serve you quite well. However, I feel like we can actually apply a lot of that to beginner players as well. Now let's say you started and you were not able to pull for an Effa because she came out last patch. Well, you're actually in luck, because while you did end up missing out on Flins' best in slot premium teammate, it would simply be wrong to say that he's some terrible character without her. In fact, it's more like Flins is really insane with her, and if you remove her, then you still get a good unit in the end. Now the thing with Genshin is that your priority pulls are generally always going to be the really broken supports, the likes of your Lady Farinas, your Shilonens, your Kazuhas. You get the idea. You have a very strong priority placement on the absolute best supports, because the best supports in this game tend to be used in basically every team. You can start looking into more niche options later on, but the nice thing about Flins is that the teammates he uses are kind of out of the way. If you were to get him now, while you wouldn't have immediate access to his teammates, they're all still 4-stars that can get their jobs done just fine at C0. For example, Aino is a free character that you're able to get just from playing Not Cry. To be honest, she's basically your only option, which is the main reason why you would even be using her. However, if you don't have an Effa, then you're kind of forced into using this character anyway, so she ends up being the best in slot Hydro character for Flins to apply Hydro for his Lunar Electro charged. And whenever you're pulling for Flins, you might run into some copies of Aino. Both her C1 and C6 end up being really good for his teams. So, there's also that going for you as well. Sucrose is another character that you're seriously going to want in his teams, considering that she's able to provide him with a ton of elemental mastery, which is something that he really wants as a character that relies so heavily on lunar reactions. Now, that's not a character that you're going to be able to get for free or from any permanent source. However, even just one copy of her is going to be enough to get the job done, and you don't even really need to invest into these characters that much as well. I know you can pretty much just leave at level 20 and put her on a Favonius. She is really just there to apply Hydro, and Sucrose also doesn't really need all that much investment. You just want to level her up enough and ascend her enough to the point where she can have all of her Ascension passives. And then for your final slot, you could also have Autodon, who is completely fine at C0 even if his constellations do help out a bit. He slots pretty nicely into Electrocharge teams. Now, you could also recommend Fischl, but I was hesitant to immediately bring her up, mostly because that's a character that doesn't really hit the ground running until C6. And let alone beginner players, I've been playing this game for like 4 years, and I still only have a C3 Fischl. Even with that being said, she's still going to be a perfectly effective teammate for you, because she's still going to be able to help out with Electro Resonance and providing energy particles for your Flins, and that's a character that really wants some good energy, so it's a good thing that Fischl is good at generating that. So then you end up with this team that is full of characters that aren't priority demand, and yet, you still get a really strong DPS out of it. It's not going to be as high potential as if you had the limited 5-star teammate, but it's still not really a problem, because you're still getting something very strong that's going to be able to carry you and fulfill all of your needs. This will then more easily allow you to just focus on getting all of his strong supports. You're already going to have a strong DPS character that's going to be able to carry you for most of the game. Not to mention that since Flins is a new release, he's likely to last for a very long time. Characters in Genshin tend to have a ridiculously long shelf life anyway, but because he's so new, he is most definitely going to last as long as you need him to, and honestly probably beyond that. And the nice thing is that investing into Flins now is going to result in an excellent investment later on. This is a really good time to pull for the character, especially if you don't really have anyone else to carry your account. Because whenever you get him now, he is very likely to get better teammates in the future to replace these 4-star teammates. So if you get your foot through the door now, then it's going to be much easier to save up for his specific upgrades. It's very likely that Columbina is going to end up being best in slot in his team somehow, and he's already very strongly performing. So, if that's the case, you can only imagine how much stronger he's going to be whenever the Archon of this region comes out. Because for the past couple of regions, whenever a new Archon releases, basically every character in that region gains a new best in slot teammate, because they end up working with basically everyone from that respective nation. So, that's also really cool. You get rewarded for your patience in the end. Not only is he going to be good when you get him, but there's something to look forward to down the line. And in terms of investing into him whenever his banner rolls around, there's a couple of options that you can take. If you would rather just save your Primo Gems because you have so many characters ahead of you to collect from reruns that you can't even just run a craftable free-to-play friendly weapon on him, The Not Cry one has a really nice passive and is perfect for him. It's going to get the job done just fine. However, if you're somebody that's newer, then you have a ton of Primo Gems that you can farm from simply playing the game and running around the map and doing quests and such. So you're going to have more than enough Primos to invest a little bit more if that's something that interests you. For instance, you may have missed out on his best premium teammate, but oh boy do I emphasize how good that C1 of his is. It's basically able to compensate for not having his limited premium 5-star teammate, and by doing so, you're basically pulling for the same amount of 5 stars. What the C1 actually does is that it's going to allow him to fit 3 mini bursts in per rotation, which all you need to know is that that's very good for him. So you can also consider doing that if you're really set on Flins and you're going to be very impressed by his performance. You can also consider going for a signature weapon. However, if you don't really have many 5-star weapons and you're just starting out, you could also consider saving for a more generalist 5-star weapon. For example, something like Staff of Homa, because then that's going to apply to basically every polearm character on your account. The nice thing about polearm characters is that they tend to have just a ton of options in general, so he's going to be one of those characters where you're not really going to feel the need to go out and pull for his 5-star weapon unless you're really into the drip. Granted, it is some fire drip, so I couldn't blame you for wanting to get it, but I am just putting it out there that if you're interested in investing wisely, you don't necessarily have to get the weapon, and his C1 is strictly better than getting his weapon in basically every circumstance, even if you do have an EFA, especially if you do have a better weapon for him than the craftable. But even on craftable, you're generally going to want to aim for that C1 first. So that's also an option at your disposal, but even if you go completely cheap on him and you just use him to carry you for the time being, then that's also going to work out perfectly fine, because like I said, he gives you a ton of flexibility in terms of saving. And whenever you're newer, there is basically always somebody to save for. So, why is this? Well, you only have a couple of characters that you really have to save for, and because he's so specific, his teammates are never really going to be super widely demanded. For instance, you're likely going to want to save for the Archon of Not Cry, or the God, so to speak, the Archon equivalent, since it's not an Archon here, but you get the idea. And also, even if you do manage to snag Flins' C1 on his first banner, then I would still recommend going for an Nefa on her rerun. However, I should add, that is something that you should only do if you're looking to invest into Flins more. It is definitely going to help him out, it is definitely going to make him feel stronger, but if you're more interested in saving for more generalist characters, which makes point at your point in the game, then yeah, that is also completely fair. But it's highly likely that we're only going to see an Nefa rerun way down the line anyway. She released very recently, so I wouldn't really worry about that for the time being, and set your sights on the Not Cry Archon equivalent instead, because that character is likely to be broken, and one of those big pickups that you really want to make. And besides, once you have all of the key pickups in terms of supports, you're able to branch out into more specific niche areas. So in terms of account-wide value, you can put a Nefa a bit lower on your priority list compared to somebody else. However, she's still a great pickup for Flins if you intend to stick with the guy, but even so, he's still going to serve you just fine otherwise. And I would say the nice thing about his 4-star team is that, aside from Fischl, there is basically barely any investment required into his 4-star teammates. You can invest into them, but it's not really going to make that much of a difference. Now, investing into Fischl definitely does help, especially if she has C6, because she does her own good amount of damage. However, for the other 4-star teammates that he uses, you basically can just put all of your resin into Flins, and this is really nice, because generally speaking, the way that you spend your resin as a newer player is that once you get to AR45, you save up all of those fragiles that you haven't been spending, and dump them all on an artifact domain for the character that you main. So whenever you only really have to focus on one character, and having him built up is going to be more than sufficient for your team, that's going to be absolutely excellent for you, because you don't have to worry about building up a bunch of other characters. You're still gonna have to level them and get them some okay artifacts, but you're barely gonna have to worry about it in comparison to Flins, and that's just so much easier for you to manage whenever you're just getting into things. So while you could definitely make the argument that there's better beginner-friendly DPSs out there, so to speak, I do still think that Flins is very friendly to get into, simply because you're able to focus so easily on him, and there's really not much else you have to farm for. All around, do I think that Flins is a really good beginner-friendly pull? I think it's a case where you can definitely make your use out of him as a beginner, and I don't think he is a bad beginner pull by any means. If anything, I think that after this evaluation, I think he's a pretty solid one. Usually in Genshin, it's not DPS first, it's get the broken supports first, but I think this is one of those DPSs where it's good to get them, because they're definitely going to carry you for quite some time, and they allow you flexibility when it comes to pulling for other characters. He is going to be running alongside Yelan. I think Yelan is definitely a great pickup. However, because we have a character named our beloved Lady Farina in this game, I would rather prioritize getting Farina, especially because if you get Flins, you're gonna have Ino, and that's going to cover you for that team's Hydro. And then you can just wait for our dearest Hydro Archon to sort out all of your Hydro needs. So, I would say that while Yelan is also a great pull as a beginner, you can't really go wrong here on the second half, I do still think that Flins has his merit. It's just gonna be up to what you prefer at the end of the day. Hopefully this video was able to tell you whether Flins is a bad beginner pull or not. This has been Juice, signing out, and just get him anyway because he's really cute.